Do you feel clear about what your boss or your company expects of you? Much of our self-doubt comes from worrying about whether we're doing it right. And the absence of clear leadership and guidance simply perpetuates that anxiety. This week, I talk with Chris Fuzie, a former police officer who started college at the age of 40 studying organizational leadership and now has a doctor of education. Chris now owns his own leadership consulting business where he leverages a lot of his experience as a law enforcement officer. Here, we talk about the importance of clearly defining the roles of both leader and follower through behaviors that reduce ambiguity and build trust. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Chris. It's great to have you here today, and I would love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Chris Fuzie. I'm a doctor of education and organizational leadership, and I wasn't always that. For about 30 years, I was a cop and worked as a cop in Modesto, promoted up in Modesto. I've been in Modesto almost my whole life, since 5 years old. So, it's been quite a while, 60 years of Modesto, but it's been a lot of fun because, I've really grown up here, been involved in the community, worked in the police department, worked in different jobs around, started out as a paper boy kind of thing, and then I like to say I only had a PhD until age 40, public high school diploma, so yeah. So, but and this is where this leadership followership stuff starts coming in. Is as a police officer, I was just having fun. I say just having fun, but it's dangerous and there's a lot of stuff going on. But when you're from age 22 to age 38, it's like it's fun. You go out and do what you do. But then I started thinking, wow, what if I get hurt? And what if something bad happens? I now got a family, I got a wife and kids, and so I decided I'd go back to school. And when I went back to school, I needed something other than criminal justice because I was already involved in that. And so I went back to school at age 40, I went back to school to get a degree in organizational leadership. I thought, oh, that'll help me if I promote, right? And then I finished the bachelor program. I finished the master's program, and they go, hey, we got a master's program, and you can get a graduate certificate in human resources if you do that. Sure, I'll do that. So I did that, and then I started looking at in those two programs. I started looking at how these theories, these organizational leadership theories, fit with everything else, and that's kind of where I got to today. Is that I just, after I say graduated, but after I retired from the police department, I was like, now what do I do? So I retired after 29 years. And so I was like, well, start a consulting company and deal with this organizational leadership stuff, and started seeing how all of this fits together. And it was kind of cool because while I was at the police department, I could use it the police department seemed like a little petri dish for me, that I could try some of this stuff out. And then since, I've been working with all sorts of different organizations. And so, I mean, yeah, I don't want to start with, I was born as a baby, and move on, but yeah, I just gave you the highlights of some of this stuff here.
That's fascinating. And I'm going to reveal some of my probably ignorance and preconceived notions about the working as a police officer too, but I would imagine there's obviously a leadership hierarchy to the police department, but what did that
Yeah.
look like in terms of the opportunity for either change when it comes to leadership? Like, were people receptive to your ideas? That culture is very
Yeah.
unique and very kind of specific, and so
So yeah, you got to understand that when I came into police work, we were at the end of one era and the beginning of another era of police work, and it's actually documented like that in textbooks. You know, we're kind of towards the end of the era, and so we're going from the more heavy-handed kind of do as I say kind of thing to more of a community policing, engaging in it and becoming part of the community. And so that's the part that I grew up in. I say grew up in the police department, is that it's more community based. And so there was a lot of change there. It was very hierarchical. It was it's a what I call it quasi military or arrangement or and so it was very hierarchical and positional power meant a lot. So when you come in with some of these ideas like, groupthink and some of that stuff, and I can tell you there was one particular night I was a lieutenant on duty and we had a gang fight, big gang fight going on, and dispatch sent out the call about the gang fight and we had a bunch of people, they were going to roll code 3, lights and siren, right? And so they're going to roll code 3, but they're going to roll code 3 to a staging point, not to where the fight was, which didn't make sense to me, but everybody was doing it. And that to me seemed like a group thing, right? And so I brought it up the next day in briefing. And I'll just say we ended up dealing with the gang fight. I canceled the code 3 so people wouldn't crash into each other anyway. So the next day I brought it up kind of a debrief and feedback session in our briefing, and I mentioned groupthink, and it was it was funny because everybody kind of goes, "Oh, Chris, why do you talk about this educated stuff again?" I said, because it matters. It's important. Because that's what. And so I talked about how just because certain people are rolling code, and then we had one person who didn't hear the message about going to the staging point, and they ended up showing up at the fight. So now they're rolling into this gang fight that has guns and shots fired and stuff like that all by themselves, and then we all just had to rush in. And so it really was a good discussion to have, and those kind of things do impact police work. It's just like any other organization that deals. Leadership is about people. So you talk about people and their behaviors, and police are no different. The people and the behaviors, and so you have to look at the behaviors and what's influencing those behaviors. Well, in this one, the adrenaline, the focus on the gang stuff, we're going into this fight, it's got guns involved, it could be very dangerous, and so we needed to be aware of that. And so hopefully this discussion about groupthink doesn't put people in peril again. But that's it's that kind of stuff. There's this the what do you call it, the positions that we find ourselves in police work. I can attribute almost every, well, not almost every single leadership theory. I can give you a law enforcement example of how that occurs because it's about people. And it's a little more, it's a little more scary. It's a little more, you have all that, the danger and the unpredictableness, etc. As a matter of fact, I put a couple of the at least one, a couple of the incidents in my book about liminal space and how, and that one is about the transition of power. And so, some of these, I changed the names to protect the guilty, and yeah, and but there, it's in there, And so you can see how this transition happens. So there's in the law enforcement world, other than just catching criminals and that kind of stuff, it's a lot of service. It's a lot about people, and so the more you know about people, the better it is in law enforcement. But there is that hierarchical thing that you have to deal with, and it has changed. It's a little better now. I say a little better because it's still transitioning.
Hmm. Hmm. Well,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because you talk about leadership being about people. I think that's a really important point. And you're obviously in police work dealing with a different level of stress and danger than the average
Mhm.
corporate professional is, right?
Right.
So much of the workplace experience these days is under a lot of stress because there's a lot of change happening. There's job insecurity. Everything has to be done yesterday. So people are often operating at high levels of stress. And I think when
Right.
we operate at high levels of stress, it doesn't necessarily bring out the best in us, right? We're coming from
Right.
a place of fight or flight. We're doing more reactive rather than thoughtful types of things. So the ability to have the kinds of conversations that you're talking about when you're not in the heat of the moment is
Right.
so important, right? Like when we're not when the temperature isn't really high, when we can kind of connect as humans, when we can
Mhm.
better understand each other. And so I think being able to have space for that is so critical.
Yeah, that's one of the good things about having a briefing like that and going over what happened the day before, or how do we avoid this. A lot of our critical incident teams. I was a hostage negotiations commander, and I was also the homicide gangs. I had homicide gang, street level drug unit. All the high speed, low drag kind of teams, and you debrief these situations. Okay, what could we have done better? And it's not a blame game. It's okay, let's rethink this. This is what we thought would be good at the beginning. Now, how do we change it? So you have this evolution uh, going on, and you have this, rethinking. And what's hard is that a lot of times we say, oh, well, on TV, they say, well, it's not like TV. You have all of the human factors in there. Fear is a huge factor that people don't think about. Fear is hardwired in us, and it's been developed over millions of years as we've evolved as creatures of the earth. It's evolved to protect us. Well, now we may be in a social situation where we don't need to, worry about the growling in the woods or whatever it is, but we still need to protect ourselves, and that fear is still there. And a lot of times we can't understand what happens in, like you said, the heat of the moment, and some of these decisions are made. We don't know what they're about. We don't know why they're happening. Which is the name of my other book is called Because Why: Understanding Behavior in Exigencies. And I talk about that. Is that there's these things that if we've tried what we've been trained to do and it doesn't work, now what?
Mm.
You know, oh, I tried something different. Well, but that we don't have a policy about that. So you are acting outside of policy. Are you? But I'm still alive, and that's the kind of thing you think about when people are in these dangerous situations. They they want to live. The fear, the survival instincts kick in, and they may do something outside of the norm, right? Um, uh, the captain who landed the plane on the Hudson River.
Ellie Sullenberg, yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
So he did not follow policy. He did not follow procedure, but he saved everybody's life.
Mm. Mhm.
And they were going to sanction him. The FAA looked into that. They were thinking about sanctioning him for not following policy. Had he followed policy, they wouldn't be able to sanction him because he'd be dead.
Yeah.
So and now they train those things. So it's that kind of stuff that we need to think about when we talk about leadership and we talk about people's behavior. Because all three of my books are about behavior,
Mm.
and that's really, a lot of it comes from the police world and dealing with behavior all the time, because that's when you evaluate people in a job, you're evaluating their performance, their behavior. If you've taught them the right way, then they should be able to produce the right way or behave the right way to get the results you want. And so that's again, that's what I write about in all of my books. So yeah. Sorry, I kind of got off track there. So
Really helpful. I'm curious if you have, I mean, leadership is such a broad concept and we could talk about it from so many different angles, but is there a particular question you're trying to answer or problem that you're trying to solve in your books and the work that you do?
yes, it's about, again, it's about behavior. It's about understanding behavior, and it's about the appropriate behavior. This latest book, the first one was, I don't know, maybe I did it backwards, because the first book was about understanding behavior that has already occurred. The middle book, S.C.O.R.E Performance Counseling, is about changing behavior as it, like if you have someone who's not doing what they're supposed to do, how do you change the behavior, and different ways of doing that. And then the last book, the most recent one, is about creating behavior that you want, and not only just creating behavior that you can teach. If you can define it, you can teach it. If you can teach it, you can evaluate it. If you can evaluate it, then you can adjust. Kind of like the rolling code 3. Is that something we want to do again? Probably not. So having these discussions. And this last one also talks a lot about, we talk about leadership, and this is the big question, is that are the behaviors of great leaders the same as behaviors of exemplary or good followers?
Hmm.
So, and this is how I came upon this, is that 10 years of doing consulting, at the beginning of the training, I would ask people, give me 2 traits of great leaders. For everybody in the class would have to give me 2 traits of great leaders. And like a good consultant, I write them on a piece of paper and slap it up on the board and put them all over the place. And then we started talking about followership and what it means to be a good follower. And I'd go back to this list and I'd say, do you want all of these in your followers also? And they go, well, yeah, we do. So then I took that list and kind of boiled it down to 86 behaviors that you want in your leaders and followers. And if you think about the power structure between leaders and followers, who has the most power? Is it the leader or is it the followers? Right? In this country, who has the most power? Is it the leader or is it the followers? I mean, we don't like somebody, we boot them out of office, and then they go and get reelected again. But whatever, however that I don't like getting into politics, but but that's kind of where it's at. That's the great experiment that this country is based on, is the freedom, and then we elect our officials. But then if they don't do what we want, can we get rid of them? And you think about, like, I recently did an article on LinkedIn about one of the football games, one of the divisional title football game, and you look at the stands. You look at how many people are in the stands there. 67,000 people, all rooting for one team or the other. If we could get 67,000 people to do 1 hour of work at a community park, 67,000 hours of work, or they all, instead of buying a hot dog, they give $3, what, they're $12 hot dogs. So, a quarter of that, you give $3 to some charity. Now you have over $200,000. I mean, just think about the possibility, if leaders really did coordinate followers. Think of how much power is there. So a lot of it has to do with the leaders and followers and getting the right behaviors. And so this last book is about creating the right behaviors, using what I call tessellations of behaviors. It's the math concept, tessellations, and then applying it to behaviors. And if you can say, these are the behaviors I want, These are the behaviors that are good for this organization. These are the ones that we want. How do we define those, train those, teach those to everybody? Then when we do that, now we know what the expectations are, and we know what the performance expectations and the evaluations should look like. And we can very easily go back to those behaviors. Instead of, if I gave you, if I asked you, what's the definition, or what do you think it means to be, I don't know, let's say honest, right? Your definition of honest and my definition of honest might be different. But if we say this is a behavior that we want, okay, now let's define it. Let's show what it is, so that everybody has the same definition of what it means to be honest, or have integrity, or be a risk taker, or any of those other behaviors. So now that we can define that, we can teach it, we can evaluate it. And so to me, it's more about the behavior than anything else. And that's why, like I say, I think I wrote the books backwards, because I started with evaluating behavior, then changing behavior, and then creating behavior. So, yeah.
Well, I really like this concept too, because I think a lot of what creates anxiety is unpredictability or uncertainty. And so there's a lot of, especially when we talk about things like imposter syndrome or self-doubt, there's this feeling of I'm doing it wrong. And because a lot of expectations are not clearly defined, and there are a lot of assumptions about what success looks like, or how you're being evaluated. If my boss isn't giving me consistent feedback, then I'm going to be making up stories about how they think I'm doing, or I'm going to get a surprise performance evaluation because I haven't been getting this information along the way. And so what you're talking about is really bringing transparency and order to a system that often feels really chaotic.
Yeah. Yeah, and think about your average organization, right? You have the vision, the mission, the values, whatever else, the goals. How many people can actually quote what those are?
Right.
And then how do you say, okay, if our mission is to serve and protect, I'll just use that one. What does that mean? Okay, that means to serve myself, protect myself. I mean, so you make it so ambiguous like that nobody really knows. And then you try to do that with the vision, the mission, the values, and are those values, are they some of these things that are nebulous and you could never touch, or is it a behavior? So if we take those away and we replace it with behaviors, so in the CEO suite, in the C-suite of the world, we replace it with 3 behaviors, 3 things that are all encompassing for everybody in the organization, and you define it and you train it, and you do that with each one. And then in the tactical, that's in the strategic area at the top of the organization, and then in the tactical, the middle area of the organization, you have 4 behaviors, 4 core behaviors, 4 things that you want everybody to do. And I'm not going to say what 4 they are, because it could be anything, right? And you say those 4 things are what we want people to do, and that's how your expectations for your managers, your expectations for your supervisors. Plus, now you can evaluate them. You can say, okay, how does this fit with our strategic goals? How does this fit with what we're doing? And all I need to remember is 4 words. I need to be, like I said, I'll pick any of the words, right? And I have in the book, I have 86 behaviors. Out of that list of 10 years that I compiled, I boiled that down to these 86 behaviors. And almost all of those behaviors, when I go back and do trainings now, I look at the list that I have, and almost every time I get the same behaviors. And so these are kind of universal things that people have said, at least people in our culture. I should say Western United States kind of culture, right? So they would be different there are some differences when you talk about Europe and Asia and some of the other cultures. But but these are the ones that we in the United States have said, yeah, this is important for us. And then at the bottom, you have a six behaviors. That's the operational division. So you put in six core behaviors, and the people in the operational division, they only need to remember six things that they have to do. You know, and it kind of feeds into everything. So that's how I look at this as why this is important with the behaviors, because it's about the behaviors.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And big ambiguous concepts mean nothing when it comes time to take action, right?
Right.
Behaviors are where the action happens. So one question I have for you is, in the work that you do you find that this model can be plugged into an existing organization? Like, is this something that you would have to, like an organization would have to overhaul or make major changes? Is there anything that tends to get in the way of the ability of an organization to adopt a model like this?
No, I don't think so, because what they're looking at is most organizations, they have, what their core function, right? And just think of those words, core function. What is a function? It's a behavior. Right? So, so what is it that they're supposed to be doing? Like, the police department, they're supposed to protect and serve. Okay, so a lot of older cops used to say, "We're not social workers." Oh, by the way, you are. Yes, you are one of the most visible social workers there is. So you are social workers, and they would get pissed when they'd hear that. But yeah, get over it. But and so we talk about this going in, and you could. I've done this with different companies, and you can look at what their current vision, mission, values are, and replace it with behaviors that support their core function. And they go, oh, that's much easier. Yeah, it's much easier, because now not only can you, it's not, we're going to be, helpful to the community. What does that mean?
Mm.
Okay, we're going to donate, and then you come up with these behaviors and make that what they have to remember to do. And that makes it so much easier.
Well, and it strikes me too that obviously the most effective approach would be to tackle this at a holistic level across an
Yeah.
organization. But if you don't have that kind of power or influence, even just being able to do this within your own team
Hmm.
would be helpful too, because again, just the clarity that you're providing to your team is going to lead to so much more productivity and again, confidence, right? I mean, people just
Right.
they show up more effectively when they feel like they understand what's expected of them.
Right. And the ambiguity is gone. And that really, like you said about the stress, and people talk. It kind of surprised me lately. You hear a lot about anxiety in the workplace. What is that from? And I think a lot of it is, like you said, I think a lot of it is the ambiguity, and that, well, what is our goal? What is our mission? Well, if you know what the mission, if you know what the goal is, now you work backwards, and you can figure out where you're supposed to go, what you're supposed to be doing. How do I get towards that goal? Um, and and the ambiguity is part of what these behaviors take away. If I know I'm supposed to pull this lever 5 times in an hour, and I pull the lever 5 times in an hour, I'm done.
Mhm.
You know, and it gets way more complicated than that when you get into some of these, legal fields and medical fields and all these other ones. But still, it comes down to doing what you need to do to accomplish the goal. And
Mm.
any kind of do comment or statement or something is a behavior. That's why I keep going back to this behavior stuff. You
Yeah.
know, yeah,
And no, I appreciate the way that you're simplifying something that feels really complicated.
Yeah, well, that's kind of how this brain works. Is I have to make it simple in order to get there. Yeah. Remember, I only had one PhD until age 40, so public high school diploma. So,
You about that too before we wrap
yeah.
up. That's a big change, especially at 40, right? I'm going back to school. Did you struggle with any self-doubt becoming a student again at that, at that point in your life?
Oh, the self-doubt came after the first class. I got in there and there's, a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year olds and who really, just finished high school, just came out of high school. And I've been a cop for 20 years and know kind of what's going on in the world, especially in little Modesto here. And now having to go into class and then and arguing with some of the instructors, because I had one sociology instructor who's a sociology class. You got a cop in the class. Why not ask the cop, right? But she says, she said, what did she say? It was all domestic violence victims are women. They're not, men cannot be victims of domestic violence. And I said, no, you're wrong. And then in the same class, we had somebody who has worked for mental health and somebody else who worked at the sheriff's department. And they agree with me. They said, no. And she goes, no, I've been teaching this for 25 years and men cannot be victims. I said, well, I arrested a woman the other night because she had beat up she actually slashed him with a knife, beat up her husband, and she got arrested and he was the victim. So you tell me he's not a victim of domestic violence. And so she called me out. So we took our break. She says, Chris, I want to see you. And I said, okay, fine. So I stay. She said, don't argue with me again in my class. You will not. I was like, okay, do I need to be here? I mean, I almost cut out right after that. So yeah, that's when it was like, okay, I don't need this.
Oh my goodness. Well, good
Yeah,
for keeping going at that point too.
yeah. Well, I knew that I needed to get through it, and I knew she didn't know what she was talking about. It's like, okay, I'm just going to get through it. I'm just going to do what I have to do. Like every college student, you do what you have to do to get a good grade in the class, right? So, so I stopped arguing with her in class. I argued with her outside of class, but not in class in front of other people. Yeah.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
I just I so admire the path that you've taken, and it's so fascinating for you to be able to put all of that experience that you have in the police force into an organizational leadership context. And I really am grateful to you for sharing some of your wisdom with us today. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
The best way to find me is www.cmfleadership.com. That's my initials. I just need to remember my initials and say leadership.com after that. So cmfleadership.com. Again, I got to keep things simple, and then on there it has a contact page, and that goes straight to my emails. So that works. You can also just use my emails, chris@cmfleadership.com. So again, I just have to remember who I am and where I work.
Well, this is super helpful, Chris. I'll make sure those links are in the show notes as well. And thanks again for being here and for doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate being able to tell my story.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.